In today's video I'm going to give you 6 tips on how to keep a successful planted aquarium. All the tips I'm going to mention in this video are in no particular order. I hope these tips can make it easier for you to grow your own aquarium plants so you can have a beautiful aquascape for yourself. And just before I tell you the first tip, if you can give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, it would really help me out a lot. So the first tip I'm going to give you is about fertilizers. Fertilizers are an important part when you're keeping aquarium plants. They provide a boost of nutrients into your aquarium so your plants can grow a lot easier. In my aquascape I use a nutrition fertilizer. The nutrient fertilizer I like to use is called Tropica Specialized Nutrition. It contains nitrogen and phosphorus, which is really important if you've got fast growing plants in your aquascape. These two elements are really important for healthy plant growth. Nitrogen helps to create more chlorophyll in the plant, and the phosphorus helps the plant's metabolism and growth. Tropica recommends you use 6 ml per 50 litres of water. That's 3 pumps from the dispenser. So my tank, for example, is 45 litres, so that's about 5.4 ml. When adding fertilisers to your planted tank, one of the most important things you do is to keep this on a regular schedule. If you're inconsistently fertilising your tank, you may end up with a nutrient imbalance, and then this imbalance can lead to algae growth. In my tank I got a lot of slow growing low energy plants such as Cryptococcus, Bucephalandra and Java Fern. These plants don't require as much nutrients as faster growing plants. So what I like to do is underdose the tank a little bit. Instead of 5.4 ml I use 4 ml, which is 2 pumps from the dispenser. I fertilise my tank once a week after I do a water change. In the past I've been quite lazy when it comes to fertilising my tank. In some weeks I forgot to dose the tank with fertiliser. And then after a few weeks I started to notice I wasn't getting good plant growth anymore, and then also the algae issue started to come back again. So yeah, it's really important you dose your planted tank with fertiliser. This next tip is something I wish I did from the start, and it's planting your tank heavily when you first set up your aquascape. Let me explain this a bit more. When you set up a fresh aquascape, there's going to be a lot of nutrients in the aquarium. Your substrate is brand new, so there's going to be tons of nutrients in there. You'll be regularly dosing your aquarium with fertilisers. You'll have good lighting, and you also may have CO2 as well. And you may even be cycling your tank for the first time as well. All these factors could lead to a nutrient imbalance in the aquarium. Plants do a really good job at taking up excess nutrients from the water column, especially fast growing plants like carpeting plants or floating plants. If your tank is lightly planted from the start, there's only so much nutrients these plants could take up at once. This means there will be an excess amount of nutrients in the water column, and this will provide an opportunity for algae to grow and take over your aquarium. So if you plant your tank densely from the start, the plants can act as a sponge to suck up all the extra nutrients in the water. And also by densely planting your tank, you can also help create more of a mature kind of look to your aquascape. So if you have some money left over in your aquascaping budget, I think it's worth buying more plants for your tank. I think this is a very important tip if you want to have a successful planted tank, especially if you have a low-tech setup as well. Lighting plays a key role in a plant's growth. Light causes photosynthesis to happen in the plant, which allows them to make energy. This energy can then be used by the plant to grow, but there has to be a balance. And this is why lighting is so important. It's a determining factor in how plants grow. If you're going to give your plants long periods of high intensity lighting, they're going to need more fertiliser and more CO2 to grow healthily. If you have too much light, algae can take over your aquarium super quickly. There are 2 important things you need to think about when setting up the lighting for your planted tank: your photo period and the intensity of the light you're going to use. Your photo period is how long your aquarium light is going to be on throughout the day. During this time, your plants will start to photosynthesize. The ideal amount of time for this period should be about 6 to 8 hours. I highly recommend you don't go over 8 hours a day, otherwise you might run into some serious algae problems. And the other thing you need to think about is the lighting intensity as well. The lighting intensity depends on what plants you want to keep in your tank. This may end up being a bit of a trial and error process, but in the end you'll find something that works for your tank. I have recently made a video on my lighting setup for my aquascape, so if you want to have a look at that, I'll leave a little card at the top of the screen. The next tip I have is to do with substrate. I think the better quality substrate you use, the more growth you'll get out of your plants. Your plants are going to get a lot of nutrients from your substrate, as that's where the roots are. Some good substrates I recommend for a planted tank would be ADA Aquasoil or the Tropica Aquasoil as well. Both of these substrates are soil based, so they're packed with nutrients. These kind of substrates contain a lot of nitrogen, which is really important for healthy plant growth. Plants like Crypts develop really big root structures, so having a good substrate is really important for their growth. Having a good substrate is also really important for small carpeting plants. These plants usually have small delicate roots, so it's really important that you have a good substrate for them so they can grow nice and quickly in your aquarium. A nice benefit of some substrates is that they can alter the water parameters a little bit. Like the substrate I'm using in my aquascape is the ADA Aquasoil Amazonia. This substrate lowers the pH and also softens the water, which makes a better environment for the plants to grow in. The softer water and lower pH is also ideal for most aquarium fish you're going to keep. By using a high quality substrate, you can help kickstart your plant growth as soon as you plant them into your new aquascape. My next tip is to do with water changes. It's super important that you do regular and quite big water changes when you have a planted tank. This is even more important when you first set up your planted tank. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, there's going to be a lot of nutrients in your aquarium, so it's important to keep this in check. And doing water changes is one way we can manage this. In the first week of setting up your planted tank, you should be changing the water about 2 to 3 times a week. You should be taking about 30% of your total aquarium's water out when you do these water changes. This may seem like a lot of water changes, but it's really important you do this. By doing these frequent water changes, you can reduce the amount of excess nutrients in your water column. You might have wondered where these excess nutrients have come from. These excess nutrients can come from many different things in your aquarium. Things such as decaying organic matter can be a big contributor to this. As dead plant matter and fish waste start to break down in your water, it will start to release nutrients into the water column. Your plants will use some of this for growth, but they can't use them all. Something that will use these excess nutrients up is algae though. Algae thrives on these kind of nutrients, so they can take over a tank really quickly and outcompete your plants. And then when you have an algae outbreak in a planted tank, it won't be looking so good. So by doing frequent water changes, we can remove these excess nutrients from your tank. This is kind of like a nutrient reset on your aquarium. If you're running a high-tech, high-energy setup, it's recommended that you do 50% water changes once a week. This is because these kind of setups use a lot of nutrients and CO2. But if you have a low-tech, low-energy setup, you can get away with doing about a quarter to a third of a water change a week. So since my setup is about a 45 litre aquarium, I like to do a 15 litre water change, which is about a third of the tank. Another really good benefit of doing frequent water changes is that it's really good for fish. You'll give them cleaner water for them to swim in, and they'll also grow better as well. Try and keep to a routine when you're doing your water changes, and it will come a lot easier and you'll see a lot more growth overall. My last and final tip of this video is to do with patience. This is kind of an odd tip, but I think it's a really important one that you should know when you're setting up a planted tank. This is something I should have done more when I was setting up planted tanks when I first started this hobby. Planted tanks are something that you can't rush. Even though plants can grow overnight, it doesn't mean you can have a nice looking mature planted tank. To have a planted tank, it can take months and months to make it look just right. You'll also do loads of little tweaks over the time of your aquascape setup. These little tweaks will help create a nice escape in the long run. When I first started setting up planted tanks, I got really frustrated that I didn't get good results when I first set up my aquascapes. Some of you guys might be really impatient like me and just expect results to happen overnight or just instantly. But that's the thing with planted tanks, you can't rush it. It's all about nature, and nature takes its time. And if you give your planted tank some time to mature, you'll end up with some really nice plant growth and a natural looking aquascape. A lot of aquascapers, including myself, have only set up scapes for about 6 months and then tear them down and start fresh again. I understand why this happens. People get bored of seeing the same thing over and over again and just want to rescape. Or some people just want to improve their aquascaping skills and just get better at it. My mindset for planted tanks is to let them mature for about a year. I feel like if you keep a planted tank running for like a year, you'll start to see loads of different changes throughout its life cycle. So with my jungle aquascape right here, I'm going to leave it for a year and see what happens, and then maybe I'll think about rescaping it. Right now it's almost about 10 months old, and you can see the crypts are starting to mature really nicely. Especially the Cryptocoryne, when it's TI Tropica, it starts to grow on really big dark brown leaves. The only bad thing I can think about when you're leaving a tank to mature for a year is probably the carpeting plants. Like the Helianthus green in my aquascape started to grow really quickly and made a really thick carpet. Some of the Helianthus green near the bottom of the tank didn't get as much light, so it started to die off a little bit. So in the long run it will be interesting to see if any problems happen from this. So the final point I'm going to make again is patience is a very key thing when you're setting up a planted tank. That's all the tips I got for this video. If you enjoyed this video and learned some new planted tank tips, give it a like. And if you guys have any planted tank tips, leave them in the comments below. I'll be sure to read them all.